Hey, welcome to Guy Shrink. I'm Bill Roman, the host here, and we talk about stuff that keeps a guy awake at night. And today I've got one of my very good friends, Dr. Dan Schaefer, who's a psychologist here in Toledo, Ohio. And we've been friends for a long time.
Couple of decades.
Yeah, a couple of decades. We were trying to figure that out earlier.
You might not want to admit that.
Exactly. And today we're going to talk about, of all things, friends. And how does a guy manage friendships, and what's that about? And we're going to talk also about how to fire friends or get fired by a friend, and what to do with that, because that's a pretty tough situation. So, Dan, welcome to our little show here.
Good to see you, Bill.
Yeah, it's good to be seen. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought a little bit about friends and what's the whole notion of friendship mean for you, and what about staying awake at night? Does that make his friends one of those factors that keeps a guy awake at night?
Well, I think there's all sorts of things that keep men awake at night, and so I've wondered whether anybody of any gender or at any time during their life we're gonna lose some sleep over something. But I've just wondered if men were more robustly connected to each other, would they be sleeping better? In other words, if they had conversations during the day about what's troubling them, our successes don't seem to keep us up at night. It's just the stuff that we're worried about keeps us up at night. There's a psalm that says, the reference is like, when my anxious thoughts multiply within me. I thought, wow, there's an ancient writing about somebody that can't sleep. And so if it happened then, it's probably still happening. It's probably still happening now. So if that's one of the major things I think that keeps men awake, I just can't imagine saying to them, well, just quit thinking about that. We'll just knock it off. If they could knock it off, they already would have. They wouldn't have even be talking to you about it. But one of my thoughts has been for a while is that, well, gosh, if guys were actually talking not about football only, but talking about what might be terrifying to them, or are they afraid of the future? Are they afraid of the economy? Are they afraid of COVID? Are they afraid that their wife's losing interest in them, or that they're losing interest in their wife, or their kids giving them the finger, whatever it is. I think all of those have the potential to terrify, but I think what really keeps them up at night is they're the only ones that know that they themselves are terrified.
So I'm in this alone. Do you think that's one of the things that keeps us awake at night? I'm the only one that's dealing with this?
Yeah, that would be a variant of it. But even if somebody else is going, that would be probably the absolute worst. That would be like bad on top of bad. But even if you knew somebody else might be going through that, and you're not, neither one of you know it, then I think you're still kind of screwed. At least for the short run.
Well, how does a guy engage in that kind of conversation with a friend, call you up and say, I got something heavy I want to talk to you about. Can we meet for coffee? And then let's talk about heaviness. Or do you think a better venue might be, let's go do something together, and then maybe if I have enough courage, I'll talk about it?
Yeah, to kind of slide into it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think both would work. I think, if there's a crisis, if your hair's on fire, you might not even call the guy. You might just come over to his house and say, I don't care what you're doing. We're talking right now. I'm burning up. I need to go to the ER. But I think, so that might sort of get, you might kick the door down otherwise in that kind of a situation. But if it's not if it's not something that most of us would call a crisis, that's a pretty good question. Well, how do you enter into that? I have a friend who has, I think he would say, maybe moved too quickly. He's a church guy and went to church and brought some, they went out for coffee, and I think it was too much too fast, and the guy won't call him back. And he's wondering why. And I don't know. I know this guy, so he's not an idiot, and he's one of my good friends, maybe my best friend, and he's just sort of wondered about that. And I know he's a likable guy. He's not an idiot, but I think maybe one possible error is that some men just kind of want to look at this like a set of stairs that you go up, and that you kind of slowly go into that. And my bias is, generally speaking, there are exceptions to it, but just in general, it's the same way that you would start any friendship, or back in the days when you were dating. You wouldn't tell all on the first night. It's just it's gradual, and I think that's a better picture of most friendships, with the exception of if you're in the middle of a crisis.
And your hair's on fire, as you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I remember we were talking earlier. You mentioned a story about you were at a conference, and everyone's going to be at a professional conference, and everyone's going to sit down and they're going to hear some talking head talk, and then the guy pulled a fast one on you and surprised everybody. And say a little bit about the difference that made in the way we could approach friendship.
That's a good, yeah. Well, what happened, it was a Christian psychology conference. And there was a pre-conference workshop. And you know what those are. You got CEUs, you go the day before, and you're all day, 8 hours in front of a whiteboard, and you want to strangle somebody or drink too much at the end of the day, So,
or both.
So we get there, and there was something in the that when you signed up, is that when you show up in the morning, bring your tennis shoes or comfortable clothing, or we're going to be. They just said something vague like we're going to be outside. So we get to this conference, and he says, "Let's go." And there's probably about 20 some guys, and we go out, and there's 2 trucks sitting there, pickup trucks. So we all load in the back of these 2 pickup trucks, and we go to a field close by, and we start just doing things that involve physical contact. A lot of different things, but oddly, the one I remember is the kids game, Red Rover, and we were doing that. So here we have a bunch of PhDs running. I'm clotheslining them as they're trying to get through between me and my new homie, and we picked up steam, and by lunch, we had one of the most robust games of volleyball I've ever had. I mean, we were going to win. The ball was flying. Somebody got one in the face. It was intense. And then the beauty of us, so we broke for lunch and then came back to the hotel where all the other, eggheads were. And we started a conversation that I am certain we would have never had we not played volleyball. Some of these guys started opening up about all sorts of things. And we even talked about the games themselves and physical, and some guys had been abused physically as kids. That came. So all this stuff came out. I think that was helpful, appropriate, intense, deep. I don't think we had ever gotten to that. And the other corollary is I was speaking at a men's conference at a Baptist church years ago. And, it involved a little bit of driving, knocked off Earth. So I get there Friday evening, right? It's 7:30 on a Friday evening after everybody worked 40 to 50 hours, and I'm looking at about 50 Baptists, right? And Bill, I got my jokes, I got my overhead, I'm trying to wake them up, and I realized the reason that they're half asleep is because I am too. We were all asleep, and I finally just broke, and I said, "Listen, let's take a break. Let's go play volleyball." I was allowed to do that, apparently. So we get out to this basketball court, and it's a different set of guys. They wake up, they start screaming, they start razzing each other, and and all that. And then when we came back to talk, we actually had a real conversation of some substance. So I'm sure there's gender differences about this, but it doesn't really matter. What matters to me is if you're in that circumstance, either corporately or individually, how do you get a conversation that's deeper than whether your sports team won?
That really intrigues me about both of those instances. What do you think is a qualitative difference in having a deep conversation before? Would a conversation have happened before you played volleyball of the same caliber that happened afterwards? You said you didn't think so. What do you think the difference was in doing the physical activity of Red Rover and volleyball, basketball, whatever it was? What do you think that activity did to engender the deepness in the conversations?
Well, we might have deficits that other humanoids don't have as men, but I think men start to make sense, or there is some kind of connection there when that happens. Some guy you think's probably got nothing going for him, all you realize this guy can serve. This guy can tackle. You start to learn. And the other interesting thing about it is that usually the people that in academic settings, are high and lifted up, you realize this guy can't even serve a volleyball. It kind of levels in some ways, levels the playing field. We're all in this together. The king is dethroned, and these little serfs that are off to the side are actually, then now they're in the mix. So it might be kind of the great equalizer in some respects, or neutralizer to these categories that we have. These are the smart people, these are the stupid people, these are the valuable men, these are not. So I think it gives maybe a more robust picture of every individual, or at least the possibility of that.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
Everybody becomes a little more interesting. You're not so prejudiced maybe at the end of the day.
So maybe guys do better through an activity than just sitting at a table drinking coffee. Not that there's anything wrong with drinking coffee, but that maybe friendship that an activity can be the door opening to maybe some deeper, more robust conversations with a buddy.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be a volleyball activity either. So I just returned from a friend's cabin in Seattle. It was great. And this guy is a known, successful artist. Mm-hmm. And in his retirement, he has created this little workshop out behind his home out there. It's out in the Puget Sound. I mean, how can you go wrong? Right?
No, exactly.
And it was real interesting. In our little group of people, he said, well, on Thursday is going to be spoon day. We're all going to go into my workshop, and you can make a spoon or a whistle. And so he would go out and cut pieces of wood, from the woods that are all around him that is possible to save us the trip. And he said, well, pick one of these, and I'll help you make a spoon or a whistle. And so I was with these other people for 3 or 4 days. And then we're in a workshop. And my wife's got goggles on, and she's got sawdust all over her. I've never seen her with goggles or sawdust all over her, And all of us are trying to do something that we very rarely do. And we all made something silly and funny and kind of cool. And we're looking at each other's spoons and all the whistles. And the conversation around the dinner table that evening was different, because we were working with our hands. Some needed a Band-Aid afterwards because they didn't know how to use the equipment, but he has all these little pieces of equipment that he pulled out, and we learned how to use them. And that conversation that evening was qualitatively different than almost every other evening. It was just an additional activity. It was, and I think in this case it was new for most of us. And even though there was men and women there, it just generated a fabulous conversation. And then since that time, I bought a little drill press from my workshop at home. So
you and your wife on Thursdays are going to go,
so we have
go
something
downstairs,
to talk about. Yeah.
Kind of make spoons and whistles.
That's right.
That is really a great idea. Mm-hmm. To do an activity on vacay that you weren't expecting. The host
right.
says, the host and hostess says, hey, let's do this kind of kinetic activity and see what happens.
Yeah, and it was out of all of our comfort levels. It was, I don't know. I don't know how to make a spoon, He said, well, it doesn't matter. Knowledge is not required.
Okay.
Just see what happens,
I remember in another conversation you and I have had, because we've had many over the years, you talked about a friendship. Friendship is about helping each other become better people.
Yeah, it's beat up analogy, but iron sharpening iron, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Say more about that, would you please, about what your thoughts are about how friends can help us become better persons?
Well, I remember Jack Nicholson in one of his movies. He talks to his love interest that, of course, he mucked it up, and finally, late in the movie, he says, "You make me want to be a better man." And that seemed to capture something for me. Like, well, that seems to be the purpose of friendship. I mean, I just need somebody more than just somebody to go to the football game with. Nothing wrong with that. I can enjoy a football game. But since we have to leave the stadium and go back to families and jobs and people being ill and in the hospital and financial setbacks and all this other stuff, I'm going to need something else in addition to that. That the football game probably isn't the most important thing. And I just think, in general, if we're thinking about it, even on a bad day, I don't think I would delight in your failure. Like, okay, let me see how I can bring Bill down. I think most of us, if we think about it, we'd probably want to be useful in another guy's life. And because I don't think we do that well alone, like, let's go out and I've never understood. I'm not a big church historian, as you know, although I am reading my first church history book as we speak. But I don't know that going out in a cave and just me and God for decades is really going to help much at all. I've never quite understood that movement, but still, the idea is that if we're not rubbing up shoulders against each other, then we're going to be like, our growth is going to be stunted. Maybe one way to say that would be. So I just think it's sort of the way that we're wired is that we're wired for relationship, and without it, I think somebody's going to suffer.
Okay, what do you think are maybe a couple of ways that friends could help one another, guy friends, could help one another become better men? What are some ways that might happen?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is to quit BSing. That may be a good start. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying how you doing, and you say fine when you're not. I don't think there's anything terrible about that. I don't think we have to be precise on our first answer. But for a lot of different reasons, and I don't know that I understand all of them, there's just a certain honesty required, I think, especially when there's something extreme, either good or bad, but especially the bad. So if there's something that's extreme that is going on, and that is not a part of a conversation with a male friend, then I have to say, you don't understand friendship, you're an idiot, or you've fallen asleep, something. It's that I don't know why that isn't automatic. I don't know why that is not automatic when a man is suffering in some way, why he wouldn't say, I'm going to go call Roman. Now, from what I understand of the AA tradition, that's incredible. That's one of the few organizations that I know of that have figured that out, that it's not a solo sport. And but I'm not terribly impressed with the rest of the world in figuring that out. I think, in particular, men are probably more vulnerable to thinking that they can go it alone than not. I mean, women go to the bathroom together. I'll never be in a place where I'd say, hey, Bill, I have to go to the bathroom. Would you like to come with me? That's not going to happen. I hope that doesn't disappoint you. But I just don't think that way. And I know you don't think that way. But most of the time, if ladies are out to eat, with their men or without, that's just something they do. I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. I'm just saying it's pretty different than us.
Well, I think we might have bought it into the idea that life is a do-it-yourself project, and that I don't need anybody else. I'm the Lone Ranger kind of thing. So
what do they call it? DIY? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Do it yourself. Yep. I'm going to go to one of these home improvement places, And there's a
By myself.
and I'm sure there's a do-it-yourself self-improvement kit right there. Well, that's the whole thing about self-help. The idea self-help that's almost like an oxymoron.
Good point. Yeah.
That's just not going to work very well. So I ask, what are some ways that guys can help each other be better people? And you talked about the honesty required, the stop, the BSing. And anything else that comes to your mind?
Yeah. Well, it's the other side of the coin. We have my wife and I have a friend in Pittsburgh who is probably the most curious person that I've ever met. So and she's kind of relationally curious, she's not a therapist, but she should be. And so if I took you over to meet her and her husband, and we were sitting on their front porch, at the end of the conversation, like if I didn't prep you at all, at the end of the conversation, she would know more about you than you would about her. She's just wired that way. And she's not unknowable. It's not like I'm not going to tell you. But she's just, that's her go-to. It's just, boom, she's on it she's on it, right? And so, but that quality of being curious is the other feature. I mean, you have to be a person who is curious about somebody other than yourself. There's something called a narcissistic personality disorder, and that's just the opposite of being curious. A narcissistic person is curious about themselves and what you think of them. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about a different kind of curiosity where you are curious about the person across from you and their complexity. So this reminds me of a story that my wife does this brilliantly. So she was trained in medicine, and we were speaking to the local, what did they used to call it? This is 30 years ago, the Christian Dental and Medical Society. I don't even know if they're still around. So we're talking to a handful of husbands and wives in this group. And so after I bored them to tears, she has a slideshow. And this is so cool. She starts out with just, and these are all eggheads, right? Physicians and their wives. So she starts showing pictures of flowers on a slide projector. Remember them? Carousel slide projector, right? So she's throwing these images up there, and I'm going, uh-oh. And so she gets kind of Freudian. Well, what do you see? It's a rose. Okay, blah, blah, blah.
Rorschach test.
Pardon?
It's like a Rorschach.
Exactly. So it was a picture of a rose, just a picture laying on the ground, right? And then she started to move in on the rose, like closer and closer and closer. And then she pulled the rose apart, took pictures of that, the pistil, the stamen, all that stuff, and it got closer and closer. And then it jumped to electron microscopy, microscopy. Okay, you know that word I'm talking about. And so we went down into like the cellular level, now we're looking at the petal of a rose at, 1,000 times or whatever. And oh my gosh, there was this complex architecture of the petal of a freaking rose. And then she made one more jump, even bigger than that. And I just thought, there's just going to be space. Then it became even more complex. And it was beautiful. And so now she got the attention of all these physicians and their wives that I never did, right? And she's got them eaten out of their hand. And she says, if we can never come to the end of knowing a rose, like we're just limited by our electron microscope, right? Then what about human beings? Maybe you can never come to the end of knowing your mate. And it busted these busy physicians in the chops, because half of them, I'm sure, were bored with their wives because they were so important, right? And what they were saying is, if you're bored in your marriage, one reason may be is that you don't realize how complex your wife is, and how your lack of curiosity, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So I think that, the willingness to disclose is one big piece. But the other is that, who are you going to disclose to? If you're lucky, you're going to disclose to a person like my friend in Pittsburgh who's insanely curious and is going to be peppering you with questions like a therapist who's had a lot of coffee.
Okay. So I love that analogy. So to answer the question about what are some ways that friends can sharpen each other, become better people, is one is honesty, revealing.
Yeah, disclosure,
You know,
honesty.
and-
Honest disclosure. Yeah,
right.
right.
And then the other one then is being genuinely curious about the complexity of the guy that you're talking to.
Right.
I remember hearing not too long ago at a conference I was at, where this person was presenting on some Jungian psychology stuff. Said if you knew the whole story about that person, you could not help but be moved to compassion.
Love it.
If you understood the complexity of that person's life, compassion is the only thing that could match the complexity. And that friends could actually do that for one another, as
Right.
opposed to, oh, that's so-and-so, he's just too complex, I can't handle it.
Yeah. Well, that's huge, and it brings two other variables into the picture. One is judgment, and the other one is advice. So there was one church father who said that if you understood all, Thomas A. Kempis, I think, I can't remember who it was. You would know better than me. If you understood all, you would forgive all.
Same idea.
It's
Yeah.
like, okay, when you see somebody acting in a way that I could murder them, and I think there are exceptions, like a true sociopath. I mean, really, lock
Of
them
course,
up, right?
of course,
But
of course.
since thankfully they're kind of rare, but in a lot of other circumstances, I mean, it's not a bad thing to kind of run through your brain that, okay, well, I don't know all. Maybe I should put the hammer down on my curiosity and trying to find out a little more, like, why would they do that? Why would they say that? So I think the judgment thing is huge. The other thing, now this might sound funny coming from a psychologist, but advice is in fact overrated. You think I'm coming to a psychologist, you can tell me what to do. Well, sorry to disappoint. I realize this is expensive, but you got some thinking to do, and I don't think that's really where I see the trouble. Most of the trouble is in the person who wants to give it. Like, I think it's overrated massively.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that most of us, and even in the helping professions, underestimate the value of being with someone through all this muck.
Which is certainly what the word compassion it literally means.
Perfect. Yep.
To feel with someone.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's different than sympathy, which is kind of, I feel bad for the kid, but I'm not
way over there. Yeah.
But I'm not feeling with them. I'm not in it.
Yeah, I'm not with them.
With them.
Yeah.
It's being in it, immersed in it.
Yeah, I
with
feel
them.
badly about them over there, or it's like if you're at the funeral of your best friend and he lost his father, you're sitting right beside him. That's a different thing than watching something on TV.
Yes. Well, I really like that, what you've said about honesty and about curiosity, and then the judgment and advice piece is just really right on, and that friends could be a place of moderating judgmentalism and being judicious in advice. Maybe more of a thing would be, well, what do you think that would take you if you did that? As opposed to, you're wrong, you shouldn't do that.
What you should have done is
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Okay,
I always like that, what you should have done.
Thank you, Sigmund. Right.
Should, well, I think it was Albert Ellis that said something about too many shoulds will make you should your pants. And so stay away from,
Yep.
not stay away, but
Yeah.
moderate your shoulds.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
So helping become better people. Okay, now there's another tricky piece about friendship that you and I have talked about, and that both of us have been around long enough to have this experience, is how do you fire a friend? Or how is it you'd manage being fired?
Yeah.
Because both of us have had experience with that.
Right. That's extremely tricky, and and the more that you are a part of a church or a religious community, sometimes it seems almost impossible. It's not even something that you can consider because we always have to get along and we always have to do. But I would like to think that there's less severe trouble in the church than outside. But since it tends to the church is supposed to attract a lot of goofy people like you and me. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's worse, and hopefully it's a place of continual improvement and a place of goofy people who want to get better, as opposed to.
Yeah, I know Martin Luther once said that whenever Satan comes to church, he always sits up with the choir.
Okay, well,
meaning the good people.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of it sounds. Hopefully, it's a rare event. Hopefully, but I think there's a time for it. So I don't think you fire someone for being unreliable, like he's late, or you lend him some money, he didn't pay it back, and stuff like that. Those are flesh wounds. Those are annoyances. I'd say, well, okay, that's probably going to cause some distance. You just don't lend him any money anymore. Mm-hmm. He's got this area, and you tolerate his weaknesses, he'll tolerate yours. But I think something like when we're talking about, hopefully, the rare event of firing somebody, I think we're talking about a different bird. We're talking about a way of operating in the world that prevents you from having a real relationship with them. So, and again, for example, if a guy is on a business trip and he drinks too much and he finds himself, or he takes somebody to bed that he shouldn't, and he comes back from the conference and he's a wreck, would I disqualify him from my friendship web? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think Scripture is clear. Look, it could happen to you. You might be next, so be careful and welcome him. Okay, right. So I think there's, in and outside the church, there's plenty of people who say, okay, forgiveness is a good thing, and that, you should probably do that. But there's a certain kind of a fella who would be not in that same category because he's a repeat offender, like a repeat offender again, and then again, and then again, and then again. So when the sin becomes a habit, so to speak, and worse, it doesn't seem to bother them anymore. I had a discussion with someone that said her girlfriend invited her out for a drink so she could meet the married man, not to her, the married man that she was now sleeping with. And she said, not in your life. Because I know the married man's wife, and I actually like her. And, I think not only do I not want to be at that meeting, I don't think I want to be with you anymore. That you are a moron, Mm-hmm. So, those, there's other ways to be troubled other than being involved with someone that's not your wife. But anyhow, the whole point is, when it becomes a habit, then you they got some splaining to do, or you have some decisions to make. So years ago, I had one such friend, and he'd stumbled a couple times along the way and said, "I'm really sorry. I want to keep my marriage." And he looked very, very sincere. And I think as friends, we give each other the benefit of the doubt. I'm not embarrassed that I did that. I think looking back, it was unwise because in the future, he was at it again. And he just got better at hiding. It was I won't go into the details, but it was very, very clear that this was a way of life for him, and that looked like, I knew his kids, they were a wreck. I knew his wife, she was a wreck. So right before my last meeting with him, I went to pick him up for some reason. And he gets in my car, I'm driving, and he reaches over with his left hand and pats me on the shoulder, on the top of my arm, my bicep. And he pats me. And he says, "Hey, you working out?" And I can't tell you on the air what I said, but I essentially said, you can figure it out. I said, get your hands off me. And clearly implying why I won't use the same language is that he was just trying to make me feel good. He didn't believe anything that he said. The fact was, I was not working out, and I was probably as flabby as I'd ever been. And so I thought, there it is. That's held our friendship together. He's complimentary, and he sometimes is attentive and all this other stuff. But I realized, wow, maybe I needed his compliments down all through the years, but I don't need it now. So a week later, I took him out for a beer, and I fired him. And he said something really, and I haven't seen him since. And he said something really interesting to me. He said, well, I didn't go out on you. I went out on my wife. And I said, yeah. But if you're lying to your wife about something like that, you've already been lying to me all along. So we are absolutely done. So it's a rare event, because I think guys like that are kind of rare.
Right.
They're out there, but they're kind of rare. But I thought, if he wants to fix it, well, let me know. But I'm not.
Right.
I got my hands full.
Right. And firing a friend, that's really serious business.
Right.
And should not be invoked quickly, like he parked it in my parking space, or he owes me some money, or yada yada yada. Of course we've heightened the ante on all of that because we got Facebook, and now we can defriend people and all those kinds of things, which we do at the drop of a hat. But you're talking about serious business here, where that particular instance that you're talking about was kind of like the existential crisis is the fact that this person didn't have any remorse. And that certainly grated against your value system of what it means to be a person, let alone be a friend.
Yeah, and it wasn't like a multicultural thing. It was it was really a fundamental. Like I just there's few cultures that would say, oh yeah, sure. Well, I don't.
Right.
This guy has serious work to do. He was not doing it and was not interested in it. And I think we all have a lot of work to do, and I want to be around people who are on a path of continuous improvement, hopefully.
Yeah, let's look for really deep friendships. The whole concept of friends and guys is really an interesting one. I mean, the history of that, I just think in the Greco-Roman world, the ancient world, you had certainly Seneca, Cato, Cicero, all these ancient writers, men writers, are writing about friendship with men.
Right.
And how to be a kind of ethical, moral friend to somebody else who helps them be a better person. So that's not a new idea. That's been around for a long time, which tells me that this is a very important thing to attend to in a guy's life.
Yeah, I think it'll always be important. I mean, think about how long that stuff has been around, and it's still relevant today.
Yeah, more and more people are saying read Seneca, read Cicero. More and more looking at ancient philosophy as a way of life, because the current ways of life don't seem to be working very well.
Yeah, right.
Look at the wisdom. So Dan, do you have any kind of wrap things up here? I really appreciate our conversation, but certainly appreciate our friendship over the years. Do you have any one-liner advice for a guy that stays up awake at night fretting about friendship?
Boy, I'm not sure I could come up with something succinct, but I think it's just maybe just to say this: isn't it ironic how all this stuff comes to the surface in the middle of the night when you're alone? I mean, your wife might be right beside you, but she's sleeping. And you're not. So what a picture of being alone. And if that's the case on the regular basis, it might be smart to think, what's preventing me from making this monologue that I'm having with myself into some kind of dialogue?
That's a great parting idea. So, well, thanks for joining us today.
Good to see you
on Guy Shrink. So,
all right.
Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Thanks, Bill.